to Mission Matters Live. I am Megan Mio, Director of the Global Mission Office, and I'm here with Celine and Don Woznica, former Maryknoll Lay Missioners and current leaders in migrant ministry in Oak Park, Illinois. And we have by Zoom Jennifer Tomshack, Communications Manager, and Daniel Lizárraga, Manager of the Mission Services Department for Maryknoll Lay Missioners. And in our first part of our discussion, we've been just talking about how each of you are connected with Maryknoll Lay Missioners, a little bit about that history and what Maryknoll Lay Missioners are doing today in 9 countries around the world. And I think we were talking some kind of important concepts and themes around being missionary at all, but as a lay missioner too, in particular, of always being in community and having those relationships that both, help you do your work as a lay missioner, but also that this is what it means to be on mission. A person of faith in the world is that we work with one another, we build these relationships, we build communities, we do this in a nonviolent way, that we're seeking justice and peace for people of all walks of life. So I wondered, though, if we can talk in this segment, our discussion, a little bit more about the mission experience and then how it has had an impact on those who have returned and then continue and find that mission never ends. But before we get into that, I'm just going to give this little summary to, again, for those who are not familiar with Maryknoll Lay Missioners, you might be more familiar with Fathers and Brothers. Maryknoll Lay Missioners is a Catholic mission sending community committed to nonviolence through prevention, intervention, reconciliation, and restoration of all creation. So Celine and Don have served as missioners to multiple places over the years, and I know that this has contributed to your passion for your faith, for the mission of Jesus Christ, and all the forms that it takes. Today, you are particularly engaged and committed to a ministry with migrants out in Oak Park at St. Edmund Parish. So I wondered, you shared a little bit about your experience as young adults, a young family, as missioners. Can you give us a couple of highlights of things that have stayed with you the most over the years from your mission experience?
Well, when we joined Maryknoll, or when we went through our formation, there was a saying back then that you go out with the idea of thinking you're going to evangelize, and you end up being evangelized in turn. And I think for lay missioners, the more you get the idea you're going to go out and change the world, but find that the world changes you. And I think that particularly comes from living among the poor and seeing people who are, at the margin, and they don't live from paycheck to paycheck, they live from day to day. And they're always on the edge. And if something happens, like someone dies, they don't have the money to pay for the funeral. The whole community comes together and supports them. But it's sometimes the individual actions that people did that just, they can't help but touch your heart. I love telling this story. It's about a patient of mine named Salustia, who would come in fairly frequently. And one day she came in and I had to prescribe her medicine. We gave medications, but we charged a minimal fee. And she said, "I can't pay you today." And she always paid me more than the minimum amount we asked. And I said, well, what happened? And she said, well, my next door neighbor has a really bad toothache. And she went to the dentist and he said he would only pull it out if she would pay him in advance. And I could hear my neighbor moaning and crying at night. So I gave her all the money I had, okay, so that she could get her tooth pulled. When she said she gave her all the money she had, that was all the money she had. These people didn't have bank accounts. Her husband made his living by going to different garbage dumps in the state and collecting bleach bottles that were used, and he would clean them up and recycle them. He was out of town. She didn't have any more money. What I did is I gave her a box of medication and I slipped whatever money I had in my pocket inside the box, but it reminded me of that biblical story where I gave out of my surplus. She was like the widow in the Bible who gave out of her substance. And she had the faith that I'm sure that she would be supported by her neighbors if she ran out of food. But it was just examples like that of people who were so generous, who had so little, but gave of themselves. And it's really, really hits your heart.
Wow, yeah.
You know, I would think that, we had some professional skills, to share. And surely it was the witness we had living as a family, both in a very poor barrio outside of Ciudad Sandino, outside of Managua and Ciudad Sandino, where we lived in a one-room house with no indoor plumbing and just one light bulb. So it's just to say life was very simple. And then in Oaxaca, we lived in also in a poor neighborhood, but we did live in an apartment that had a limited amount of water, and often the lights went out, but we're okay. And so Don is physician. My field is public health. I have graduate degrees in public health. So you're kind of thinking, well, we got some skills to pay those bills. We have things, concrete skills to share, right?
Right.
You know what really counts? You know what really counts? We realized what really mattered when we were leaving Nicaragua, after 2.5 years there. And our community was having like a little farewell party, And it was in the church, and we walked in, and of course this was always, they always say, "Préstame su bebé," let me borrow your baby, because they liked holding our babies, right? And so, people were kind of going around and thanking us for doing this and doing that, and blah, 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 blah. Until the woman who was holding our daughter, Mora, who was born in Nicaragua, she said, she was the last one to speak, and she raised up Mora like this, and she said, well, they did wonderful things, but they had their baby here. She is a Nicaraguan. The fact that we want our baby to be born in Nicaragua and to become a Nicaraguan, as opposed to going back to the United States and have the baby in the United States, meant more to them than anything else we did.
Yeah. All the hours that you would spend or whatever. It was about really...
It was about that solidarity that we wanted our baby to be born among them. That's what
At the same time, of course, people recognized the value of our work. And when we left Mexico, our neighbors had a going away party for us, and they knew we were coming back to Chicago, me in particular, to work, and you as well, to work with the Mexican-American population here. They sent us off almost like a mission sending ceremony, saying, please take care of our paisanos in Chicago.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
We were missioned to Chicago by the Mexicans.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful. That really speaks to the communal reality, and even your story about individuals helping their neighbors, that they recognize there's needs everywhere, and that you go where you're called and where you're needed, and we were blessed to have you here for the time that you were with us, and then we send you off to the next place.
But we were the ones who were blessed, ultimately.
That stayed with you, It really changes your whole worldview to have these kinds of experiences. I was thinking, even in the first segment, but now with the stories you shared too, about this idea about kind of reliance on God too, of, we get kind of distracted by things and things that we think we need, or control we think we have, and that this experience fundamentally, showed you that so many people can live very rich lives with very little, physical stuff, and that those relationships are sustaining for you, and that even many years later, that those things.
I always compare it that there's this saying, there's no atheists in foxholes, and most of these people lived day-to-day basis in foxholes, so they did turn to God constantly. Yeah. There's a
depth of faith that was a gift to be shared, that you were evangelized by. So now you're involved in this migrant ministry in Oak Park, and I understand that's a communal effort too. This isn't just you, although I know you're leading. I wonder if you can just tell us a little bit more about that, and maybe if there's a connection with your Maryknoll experience to what you do now. I'm sure there is.
Well, I should say it's actually sponsored by the Catholic community of Oak Park. Okay. We were 4 parishes, now we're 2 parishes, and it's the Catholic community of Oak Park that sponsors it, but it is very much interfaith, and that's what makes it so incredible, because we not only have other Christian churches, Protestant churches, the Methodists, the Presbyterians, a variety, but also the Unitarian Temple and the synagogues are part of our larger community. So it actually began in in June of 2023, when the migrants were being bused up to Chicago, okay, remember? And then the shelters were filled, so they were being placed in police stations.
Yeah.
And a number of migrants were placed at a police station, District 15, in the Austin neighborhood, which is only it's just by borders to Chicago. I mean, Oak Park. So, Oak Park is border Chicago, and that police station was 2 blocks into Chicago. So I became part of a team of just a very loosely organized group of volunteers organized on a WhatsApp chat to provide bedding and air mattresses and clothes and shoes and food and all this stuff to organize to meet their needs. Well, one of the concerns that I had was where are they going to take showers? Because, the police got to do police work. They can't run a hotel there, they're always going to take showers. So there was a closed rectory. We were 4 parishes, now we're 2 parishes. There was a closed rectory just 2.5 blocks from the police station, right on the border of Oak Park and in the Austin neighborhood. And I had learned this good word called nagvocate. And so I nagvocated.
It's a combination of nagging and advocating.
Exactly,
yes?
exactly.
Okay.
But to a very open and willing pastor who said, that rectory is closed. Can the migrants start taking showers there? He said, oh, yeah. So so that was fabulous. And then, not only the migrants taking showers, but then it grew up. We were serving breakfast, and then we provided clothes and then shoes. And it grew and it grew and it grew, of course, as the number of migrants grew at the station. But then even when they were moved out of the shelters, out of the station to the shelters, they were coming on the Green Line.
Oh, from further away.
From further away. So we totally outgrew the rectory, and we moved to a closed Catholic school, St. Edmund's School, and that became Centro San Edmundo, where we are still operating today. I don't know if you want
So
to
before we moved to St. Edmunds, we actually had to move part of our operations into the church right next to the rectory, because as the weather got colder, we were providing coats and blankets. We would receive people from all over the Chicago area from the different shelters. So we would be open 2 mornings a week. We'd be seeing 250 to 300 people a morning. So the old baptistry was turned, you like to say, into a Payless shoe store, and we had the old choir practice area where the blankets and coats were distributed, and we had bags of things in all the pews. But we couldn't, that was also being used as a church, so we had to clear things out. So moving into the school was just a godsend for us.
Yeah.
It gave us all these are old 1917 built classrooms, so they're huge. They probably had 60, 80 kids in them. So each room has, one room is dedicated to women's and kids' clothing, another room to men's, another to shoes, blankets, and toiletries. We have a daycare area where the parents can leave their kids when they're there. And we have a breakfast room upstairs. But it's also allowed us to have ancillary services. So we have Loyola physicians who come and volunteer and see people who need to be seen. We have immigration support services, which are really in demand right now, helping people fill out their asylum applications. We also have a social service agency that comes in. It's funded by grants, and they help with social service work. And we also offer ESL classes there. So having this school, though today the heat wasn't working, it was 41 degrees when we went in there.
Boy.
So it's an old building, and it has its quirks, and hopefully they'll fix that by tomorrow. But
It's the church, yeah.
yes.
It's truly a center. I mean, it's a
amazing.
lot of different kinds of works that are located there.
And you know what's interesting? They keep referring to it as La Iglesia, as the church. So at first I'd say, oh, no, the church is across the street. This is a former school. And they'd say, okay, nos vemos en la iglesia. What is church?
Yeah.
What's happening in that school building
Right.
is exactly church.
That is church.
So it is a center. We're open Tuesdays and Thursday mornings, twice a week. We've had, 500 volunteers over the course of that year and a half. But there's still a core group that comes in, usually about 40 people every Tuesday and Thursday. But in those 2 mornings last year, we had 10,800 migrants walk through our doors. Now some of those are repeats, It's not all, but, and then we also allow them to shop, quote unquote, because we give, it's a free store in many ways, for their kids who aren't present because they're in school or their spouses who are working. So we served another 3,400 people that way. That's 14,200 people who we were able to help last year alone.
It's a big operation. You got to
It
get very
is.
organized. You got to keep kind of, but you also are working with so many people offering their time and or their skills in terms of lawyers and doctors, etc.
Yeah, and we have to talk about the impact on the volunteers.
Yeah.
Absolutely the impact on the volunteers. Because Don and I get there early, we open the door at 7 o'clock, there's often migrants waiting, and then as the volunteers come in, I'll say, oh, good morning, thank you for coming, and they'll say, it brings me joy.
Yeah.
And they come every Tuesday, every Thursday, week after week, month after month, and we've been doing that for a year and a half.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And when you said that, I pulled my hair because most of us are retired people.
Yeah.
Because who else
People
can
are
work
available.
Tuesday and Thursday mornings, right?
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
a
yeah.
few younger people, but it's mostly older people, and it gives meaning and purpose.
But
to
then
their
you've
life.
also received donations of all these items, right?
amazing.
Clothing and food and shoes and everything, and people, I'm sure, wanting to be part of this effort,
Yeah.
and maybe having some limited time, but
Yes.
wanting to give in some way, and so that you're providing that opportunity for people then to be part of this communal effort, and of all faiths and all walks of life.
So they'll take up collections.
amazing.
We just had a big collection from the Unitarian Church.
Amazing.
And also
And
Boy
financial.
Scouts and Girl Scouts and high schools, Trinity and Fenwick. And OPRF. They've been phenomenal.
Yeah, responding to the needs of our time, and those who are some of the most vulnerable
Yep.
in our city and in our areas. It's a wonderful thing. And I know it was partially inspired by your Maryknoll experience.
Absolutely.
It gave you the tools to be able
We
to
speak
say.
Spanish.
Yeah,
that helps.
yeah,
that helps.
yeah. We have an idea of what the kinds of realities people are coming from, and just
Yeah,
what the
yeah.
needs would be,
Yeah.
which is a wonderful thing. Again, it is a gift for folks who wouldn't even know where to begin. And to be able to advocate and say, I know some people at the parish, and we can make this thing happen. That's how mission works, honestly.
Exactly.
We talk about like with our office, we have folks we identify as, like, we call them U.S. contacts, somebody who's kind of the go-between, who kind of helps maybe language-wise translate, but also culturally translate, making sure that all the T's are crossed, the I's are dotted, make sure that they can participate in our programs, and then everybody gets to benefit. So you need those people who can be those connectors and go-betweens. So this is a beautiful gift that you've provided in helping to lead in that way. But I wonder, we've got Jennifer and Daniel still with us on Zoom from Maryknoll Lay Missioners. I wonder, and I think I know the answer, but is this very common for Maryknoll Lay Missioners when they return to continue in different forms of mission and ministry, in service to others like Celine and Don? Jennifer, can you tell us?
Yeah, it's so interesting that that Don and Celine said they felt like they were missioned back to Chicago, because I see this time and again with return missioners who are serving the same populations in their home communities that they served in their mission countries. Just one example, I recently talked to a couple who were missioners in Venezuela 35 years ago, and they live in Seattle. And they're still serving Venezuelans, only now Venezuelans who are refugees in Washington. And I learned all about, because they know the ins and outs, they know the issues that that particular population is facing. There's something like 8 million displaced Venezuelans in the world right now, and 500,000 of them live in the United States. And Washington is, a state where one of the top resettlement states, and there are a lot of Venezuelans living in the Seattle area who they live in tents, in encampments, and so this particular couple, they've been, working with the Venezuelans there for many years, and the need seems to be growing in recent years, and they're just so glad that they're there to be able to serve the same population that they were with all those years ago, and they said it feels like a homecoming to them to be able to spend this time with them and be in solidarity with them again, and just like they were, when they were in Venezuela.
Wow.
But and we have a saying in the missioner community, once a missioner, always a missioner. And I just continue to be impressed by how true that saying is. It's amazing how many returned missioners are still living their call to mission decades later. Especially, it seems like in retirement. It seems like so many missioners, they come back, they have another career, and then they retire and they decide they really want to roll up their sleeves and get busy with the call to mission only in their home community. And we do have return missioners who do decide to go back on mission. And this year we had an incredible example. Marge Humphrey, who served in East Africa for 20 years. She returned to the U.S. for another 20 years. She worked on staff at Maryknoll Lay Missioners for a long time. She retired and decided retirement did not suit her. And so she decided to go back into mission. And last December, she was part of the sending ceremony, and she's back in her beloved East Africa.
Wow. Yeah, once a missioner, always a missioner. That's
And if I
amazing.
could just add a little to that, Megan,
Mhm.
is that earlier before the show, we were talking about children of missioners who have grown up in the mission field with their parents, as
Yeah.
the Woznicas, young Woznicas did. And this past year, we did have a sending of a young man, Josh Sisolak, recent graduate of Notre Dame. And by the way, yours truly as well, go Irish. Uh, and his father was a Maryknoll Lay missioner in Thailand. And although Joshua did not grow up in the field, he was definitely formed by his father's continued commitment to being a missioner, where he teaches at an Catholic Indians reservation school in Montana, and certainly formed his children in that way. So Joshua was, and I guess has in some ways a returned missioner, certainly with vicariously serving through his father and his mother's call to serve previously. And one more thing I want to add is there are also exists the Maryknoll affiliates who are based here in the United States, who may not have served overseas, but certainly have that mission spirit and live it here in the U.S. There is a house here in El Paso that they established for the purpose of people coming for short-term mission service to serve the needs here on the border. And so the Maryknoll affiliates who have their own website and entity, that's another way for people to also live out mission in the spirit and solidarity of the mission of the Maryknoll family.
I just want to add that we have a very active Maryknoll affiliate group here. In fact, we just met yesterday. And so that's, another way. Some of them are former Maryknollers, but Maryknoll Lay Missioners. Other ones are people who just like the Maryknoll charism and have joined us.
Well, I'm struck by the idea that you received so much from your experience as a Maryknoll Lay Missioner, that then, in some sense you're called upon, at a different time, that you share that gift with others. And that I'm sure that that's what attracts people, affiliates as well, to consider or to discern their own vocation. That this really is a calling. This is a response to realities. When the missionaries that we work with in our office at the Global Mission Office, there are many different vocations, different places, different realities, different kinds of works. We can't do everything, but we can do the part that we can do and do it as well as we possibly can, and find our greatest gifts and put them to use. And I think sometimes the need can be very stark, it can be very obvious and kind of hit you over the head, and sometimes it might not be quite so clear, but in the case of working with migrants in particular, here in the city, in the Chicagoland area, this has been something that's been so visible, and we're talking about people of all ages, families, and it's been ongoing for over a year. So this particular kind of wave, I mean, I know this has been an ongoing issue, but anyway, that this is really trying to respond to what you can do in any particular moment, and that in working with Maryknoll, you're not alone. You're part of a community. This is one of the beautiful things about being a missioner. So wonderful. All right, well, we are on to the next topic. We're going to talk a little bit more about what it might mean to discern to become a lay missioner now that we have a better idea of what kind of impact it might have on you in your life. We'll come back, please, for part 3 so we continue our conversation about mission never ending. Stay tuned and come right back.
Right.